Welcome to After Further Consideration, a DEI-focused podcast brought to you by Enrollify and Element 451. I'm Dr. Cody Nielsen, Executive Director of Convergent Strategies and Higher Education faculty member.
And I'm Dr. Tamika Ferguson, Assistant Dean for Student Affairs and Inclusive Excellence, and an Assistant Professor at Virginia Commonwealth University School of Education. We're sitting down with seasoned change leaders for candid chats about responsive leadership, addressing campus crises, navigating institutional shifts, and fostering sustainable change, all through the lens of equity and inclusion.
Join us every other Tuesday to learn about these leaders' real-life challenges, lessons learned, and the innovative solutions they develop to tackle these complex issues.
Our goal is to help you drive positive and inclusive change on your campus.
After Further Consideration is a part of the Enrollify Network, a community of innovators, thinkers, and doers dedicated to revolutionizing higher education. Learn new skills, find your next big idea, and network with the industry's best minds at enrollify.org.
Enrollify is presented by Element 451, the next generation AI student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful and personalized interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com. So we are so excited today to have with us Sarita Brown as our guest. One of the things that I'm so excited to talk with Sarita about really is, what is Excelencia in education? It's this organization that not a lot of people might be familiar with, but the impact of the work that they're doing and the partners that they have. And I've known about this organization for going on 20 years and have benefited from just the work that they've done in partnerships with different organizations and communities, not only in DC, but across the country. And so, Sarita, I'm so excited to have you not only on our podcast, but to really amplify the work that you have done as the co-founder and president of Excelencia in Education. So could you give us just a brief intro of the work that you've done and kind of how you came to found such a wonderful organization?
Thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Excelencia in Education was co-founded with Deborah Santiago in 2004. And it emanated from a very powerful alignment that Deborah and I discovered for 3 years earlier. She was a policy analyst in the Department of Education. I was tapped to be executive director of the White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for Hispanic Americans, very long title, and the opportunity, which is to look at a national discussion about my language, human capital. The executive order focuses on methods and achievement levels and participation of Latinos comprehensively, early childhood through college education. This was in the days when we were first dealing with the internet, employment of Latinos in the federal government. It was very comprehensive. The thing, though, that is driving these conversations, and it definitely was a source of momentum for Deborah and myself, was what we say in Spanish, y qué, and what. I mean, it's great. You have this executive order. It's marvelous that you have this wonderful commission. It's all these things are, but what are we going to do? And how are we going to affect change? And how will we measure it? Those were things that very good people can work together for a long time, and they don't get there. That's not the way they're wired. That's not the way they think. Deborah and I, we didn't know each other, but as soon as we met, we had that affinity. The other part was that between us, we cover the landscape. Deborah is a phenom when it comes to analytical analysis of key information, all of the phenomenal sources of important data from the federal government about financial aid participation, about participation in college, about employment, looking at the census. That's for her easy. And what she also is a person who can take volumes of data and immediately engage in a conversation about what it means. And for someone like myself who had the responsibility of how do we frame this? How do we then put in motion change? How do we articulate a change agenda? To have someone as a partner who could consume that kind of analysis, put it into play, and then, like me, believe that everything is possible. It matters what we do. We came out of 3 years of working together in the federal government knowing this analysis and ability to say, what do we do, wasn't around. I mean, people were talking about demography. They talked about achievement gaps. They wanted to work on it. But that which for us was immediate wasn't available. And so when we started, we said, okay, well, let's contribute. And what we thought we were launching was an initiative, and it was going to grow inside an existing nonprofit organization. And then things started to take a different path.
I find so much joy in how you shared this origin story. Two folks who did not have a prior connection, but who had this shared mission, and how you explain the balance of skill sets and responsibilities. One of the things that I have learned a great deal from with Excelencia, and that I hope that more people learn, is the connection to policy. Not just trying to push policy, but it's the advocacy and the ability to tell this story about the Latino success of so many students. And also, you all moved into talking about the HSIs and the Hispanic Serving Institutions. When you have been able to share the story of the why, like why should we advocate? Why should we present information that is factual and not just grounded in this emotional sense of wanting to tout that we're for the Latina student success, right? Which I feel like a lot of folks are like, oh, yes, I'm down for it. Let's support this group of students, this group of people. In my conversation with you, I've learned that it's more than just saying it, it's more than just espousing it. Could you really just elaborate why being grounded in policy and grounded in fact and grounded in analysis is so important when you're talking about a historically marginalized population of people and also those institutions who are committed to that population?
Absolutely. I think that um, the dynamic of the growth of the Latino community in this country is a narrative that it really is critical how it's told. We have lived through in this country an extended period where it is something that people fear. It is something that people keep hearing is a discussion about the other. It's and I really don't want, I mean, it's not our nature to spend time talking about that, but it's true. I mean, when we started, it by comparison was a bit more neutral, but right now, I mean, the discussion or the assumption that is asserted that somehow, just be simple, Latinos don't belong. I mean, Latinos have been here in a good portion of the geographic area that we call the United States long before others have been. The line that's used, the border moved on us. We did not immigrate. We can get into those kind of conversations, and sometimes we do. But it's really more, how do we think about any population that is here, eager to engage, to serve, to work hard, to build a life for themselves, for their families, for their communities, for the country. That framing is both the emotional part, and then it's also the factual part. Because right from the beginning, take whatever point I just said and look at, so what is the participation of Latinos in the workforce? It's extraordinarily high. Now, what kind of positions are we in? primarily low-level positions because of educational experience. Would we be involved in higher paid jobs? Would we contribute more financially? Yes, we would. So I can go pretty fast from what I started with, which is that we want to participate, and that we are here, that we are loyal, that we are engaged. But then when you get into the what do you do, and of course, we have our lens, which is we believe in education. We believe in the power of higher education. That's when we can get pretty quickly into let's start this conversation with facts. Let's look at, again, I'm just going to give you an example. So much of the discussion that is advocacy, because it wants to drive attention, it oftentimes starts with crisis. And one of the things that Deborah and I found to be problematic was the rising tide and the growing wave and the natural phenomenon, like prepare yourself for the onslaught of this growth of Latinos. That itself we found to be problematic. Whereas if you thought that what was growing was abundance and wealth and good, you probably would describe it differently. Now, we didn't just say, okay, it's because of the way that people are describing. Okay, it maybe even be the way they feel about it. But what our opportunity is to make clear that the opportunity is before us, and that the very core dynamic, we both are first generation college goers. We both know that our parents supported our pursuit of an education because they believed, and I tear up every time I talk about it, as an act of faith, they believed that acquiring a degree would make our lives better. What it takes for families to send their children to an institution of higher education on faith, not because they personally graduated and they can tell you where to go, to live, or tell you what fraternity or sorority, or to tell you what to study, but because of a firm belief, Mijo will have more options if he gets a degree. That narrative, that is what we wanted America to hear and to orient their response in accordance with what we see, which is an abundance of talent that is ready to participate.
Yeah, wow. I'm sitting here as Tamika and I sort of work on processing this all. And one, thank you. I feel like you have articulated for the audience so many pieces all at once, and also those that don't get to see the emotion and the breadth of like the experience of that, I think is just so important to cover and to think about as our conversations are going. You mentioned the idea of starting with crisis and crises, if you will. And one of the things that we talk about on this podcast, one of the really deep questions that we often ask is about if, those of us that as we sort of work through this, and those of you that have been through those crises, if you can share about some of those specific crises that define those leadership moments as a nonprofit leader. And I'm wondering if there's any moments that just sort of percolate to the top that you'd be willing to share with us.
Yeah. And part of it is that it was a gut check, and it is something that we move through. And because we're now 20 years old, we're in a position to reflect upon it. So I've been talking about the framing and the focus and what was our goal when we said there's got to be a different way, there's got to be a better way, there's got to be a more accurate way. And so that led us to frame what was the Excelencia initiative. We did not wake up one morning and say, sure, let's start a national nonprofit. I mean, what we had, though, was a commitment to provide alternative ways to make good things happen, to make change occur. What happened in a structural way is that we had the opportunity to engage in a conversation with program officers from a significant funder, and the discussion led to interest, led to a very purposeful meeting and handshake commitment for $1 million investment in this work. And with that, and then all the prep work that we had engaged in, which was to create an alliance with what was then the Pew Hispanic Center, and that would be the home for what was originally the Excelencia initiative. Um, a month went by, and we hadn't re engaged in the structural financial discussion. Um, the second month went by, and uh, okay, that's a little curious. And finally, was able to engage the program officer, who so the crisis was twofold. One was the sort of casual characterization that somehow I got it wrong. I misunderstood, I whatever. And since we're talking and you're going to edit this, I figured you can use it or not. I was uh, I was there with my infant daughter, with whom I had flown to Miami for a sit down meeting to have about what we were going to do with two program officers there. So, hmm, I misunderstood. Oh, okay. But I heard that. Now, what's going in my head is, okay, you miscalculated. You made a promise you can't keep. You whatever it is. But that was the first one. It was like it makes you second guess yourself. What is that? But then the next step, which is, okay, so this isn't what we planned on. I, as a new mother with my child, with no source of income, was needing to decide if this was something that we were going to do. And Deborah and I talked about it and made the decision that this was something we believed in so deeply that we would give it 6 months to see if in those 6 months we could reorient, because we'd had this discussion with one funder. All right, we can talk with other funders, we can figure out the viability, we can move on, let's pivot, let's see if it's possible. But neither of us are martyrs for the cause. I mean, we're very practical. We're both, we're both working class folks who say you got to pay your bills and you got to get it done, and it had to have a time limit. And in that 6 months, thankfully, we were able to secure sufficient funding to say, all right, let's take it the next step. Let's take it the next step. And in a very real way, now we are 20 years old. We have grown to a team of 35 plus. We have received significant investments, including a breathtaking gift from Mackenzie Scott. So we know that the validity, if you measure it in terms of, are you worthy of investment? Are people seeing an ROI from what you do? I mean, all those kind. Yes, many times over. But when you talk about crisis, it was a profound crisis because we were both fully cognizant that we were positing a different way. We weren't doing more of the same. And it was very strategic. I mean, we believed pretty deeply that if more of the same was going to somehow yield a better difference, it would have done it already, because I mean, I don't, there was a lot. We believed that what was missing was an asset based approach. And the only way that we could do that was to be it and to show it. But it was so profoundly sh- shocking that people could behave like that. Okay, I got over that one. But then it also makes you second guess, it makes you doubt yourself. And I'm very proud that we could say, and I'm saying this because of your purpose and who will be your listeners. It's the stillness of your own voice, and it's what you decide is important, and nobody should be a sacrificing energy for that. You want to stay strong, body and soul, but you probably, whoever is listening and whoever is contemplating, you will be the best judge. It's not up for others, it's you. And if you decide it's important, then you pursue it, but also be strong enough to pivot and do another way in another time in another place, because it's the energy of change and the commitment to a community that believes as you do that change is necessary.
I think that last point and that willingness to energize around change and to push through what you believe in. The whole time you've been talking here, I've been thinking about how I've worked with so many nonprofit leaders over the years who are they're just struggling with the idea that they have to prove concept before they get the insertion. They have to do all this labor, and they're like, but no one believes in this. And I'm like, no one, what's that line? Is it Nelson Mandela that says everything is impossible until it's done? And I do think that it's a really motivational thing to hear you sort of share this story, because the crisis is sometimes in the believing in it, the trusting through the struggle, like that the struggle itself is the act of making it. Yeah, this is really powerful. Tamika, do you have any follow-up on this?
I do. What stood out to me is sometimes we talk about the risk that's associated with leadership. But when you said we weren't doing more of the same, so to pivot, not just with this asset-based approach, but to pivot and do something different and risk, as you said, new mother, no income, and still committed to the 6-month timeline, I have to wonder what happened in those 6 months for you to develop that strength to be able to still be leading for 20 more years. Because there had to be something that happened in that waiting period that invigorated or pushed or kept you going so that you didn't lose that faith. What was that intrinsic reflection that you had with yourself?
I don't know that I think that it changed. What it was is in some way the freedom to go full out for 6 months. The freedom to say, I don't have to worry about a year from now, because all I need is information in this first 6 months. The cause, I know the cause is right. I mean, I know that I'm extraordinarily lucky. I discovered this cause as an undergraduate at the University of Texas at Austin, and in a very direct way. From my experience then to now, it's a derivative of the same cause. But the period, because what was shocking was that, you're working with what you think are credible people, and this wasn't like on a napkin at a restaurant. I mean, this this was a very formal process. And again, I would have more respect for the person if what had been the answer is, I'm sorry, I overshot, I what. But to just to act like, oh, no, 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 you mean, that's when I went, oh gosh, the world is a harder place than even I was prepared for. But I'm a big girl. I mean, I hear BS. I'm not going to belabor the point. We're going to move on. But then what became the settling factor was, you know, I, is this evidence that we should stop? And that perspective was a legitimate one. I mean, okay, go get yourself a job, and there's lots of good ways to serve. You could do it. But what we also saw is that the timing was right, the methods were right, the hosting organization was responsive. That okay, what we needed was a little more time to deal with what was, in essence, a factual, structural thing. We needed funding. And so we're not going to start with $1 million. Instead, what we're going to do is to say 6 months. Can we make it viable? Now, to your point about sustained us for 20 years, what has also been true, though, is that unlike organizations we get compared to, we've had to work triple hard because most of those organizations started with the $1 million. They built the infrastructure, they had the back office, they did, and Deborah and I mean, we did it all at the beginning. And literally, I think it's important. I don't know that I would necessarily advocate other people do it the same way, but the satisfaction that I would say is available if you believe what you do is important, and you don't, if you have the means to say, I don't have to wait. I have savings, I have a spouse who will support whatever the means would be. I think it's worth considering, because righteous work that gets you up in the morning and that accomplishes things that you value, that, I mean, I do commencement speeches, and a lot of time I spend talking about that, because it's what we spend our time on, it's what we give our life's energies to. And ultimately, we really can make fundamental decisions about that.
Hey, it's Tamika. Element 451 is hosting the AI Engage Summit on October 29th and 30th. This free virtual event features many of your favorite Enrollify creators and will explore AI's impact on student engagement, enrollment marketing, and institutional success. Learn how to tap into the power of AI to enhance student communications, personalize the admissions process, and support at risk students. Plus, hear directly from current students on how AI is influencing their engagement in campus life. The AI Engage Summit is your guide to understanding and applying AI at your school. Registration is free. Visit element451.com to save your spot. Now back to the show.
I don't think it's all about money. I mean, I don't think it's all about pay. I don't think it's about status. I never have. And in policy and in big scale change, you have to have clout. I mean, you have to have the ability, to walk in a room and be able to say, "Orale, I'm here." I mean, we're going to do it, but that doesn't come with a big salary. I mean, you can have a big salary and people still don't pay it attention. So there are dynamics of knowing your own worth, knowing the worth of what you do, and having the ability to assert it. All of that, I believe, is in this set of choices that Deborah and I made and have been propelled by. It's not been easy. It is not for people who um, people have to have stamina. And I'm the first to say, 20 years in, for people now, a lot of them, to be discovering Excelencia. Okay, I mean, we've not been hiding, but we've reached a level of impact. So, well, what do talking to somebody else? What are you talking about? Well, what organization is this? Well, what, I've got a thicker skin now. I used to, oh, it was so painful. I mean, people didn't know what we did, and we're working so hard. And okay, they'll catch up.
Mhm.
They'll catch up, and we'll be here.
What I appreciate about how you're sharing this is there's so much wisdom that can be just extracted from you sharing how you found freedom in crisis. I don't think that a lot of people, a lot of leaders will be able to say, yeah, I can't wait to go through crisis so I can have some sort of freedom. And yet, when you talked about the 6 months and then sustaining that over 20 years, you've used the word freedom, you've used the word righteous, you've used the word of worth, right? There's some value in being able to be committed to asserting what you know is valuable. And I am so excited and inspired by that, because sometimes in times of crisis, the attacks that we're seeing legally and politically, people who have that heart, who also feel what they're doing and what their cause is, they can find value in it, have so many dreams and aspirations, but the stamina is waned depending on whether or not they can weather that storm. And so I am so appreciative of how you're framing it to say that, it's not easy. You have to grow the skin, you have to step up, you have to even mature a little bit. But I also think not everyone is a leader in the nonprofit space, right? I think even just that commitment, let's be honest, that commitment is one of such significant strength that's required, but also some passion work and some ability to be able to overcome things that people would not even think about if they're like in a institutional system or K-12 or higher ed or even in corporate. And so one of the things I'm interested in is the word, equity and being equity focused in how you lead. When it comes to you making decisions with some of your collaborators and the people that you work with, those organizations, those institutions, how do you feel as though applying an equity lens, particularly in decision making within the nonprofit space and developing mutually beneficial partnerships, how do you feel that applying an equity lens impacts you? And how have you seen it enhance the work that you're able to produce with Excelencia?
Well, it starts at home for us because uh, while I don't know that we presented what we currently see as a co leadership model, with Deborah being CEO and me being president, it, it is the very nature of this organization. I mean, the equity part. I'm an only child. I haven't had siblings. I mean, this is not something that, I grew up understanding, turn taking, or, I mean, so it literally from the very, very beginning, the driver was total recognition that the ultimate decision would be improved, strengthened, enhanced if both of us had the opportunity. And that was almost organic. It wasn't like, okay, let's, we've recently been getting phone calls from people who want to learn about our co-leadership model. And it's fascinating how they start with bylaws or lawyers or things like that. And I'm going, well, maybe for you, but that's not how it started for us. It started with I I respect Deborah deeply. I don't always agree with her. It can get really loud when we're talking or discussing. But the point is that I trust her totally. And I believe that the quality of what the discussion will yield will enhance the ultimate strategy. And to reference a dynamic from the previous comment, it's leadership is hard and it's really lonely. And so I have had the strength of a partner, hermana por la causa, I mean, from the very beginning. And so that is a reinforcing. Going from the in family kind of dynamic of equity to others, I mean, I think that it takes a lot of tending, and I also think it takes a fair amount of ability to take risks. We have a fair amount of lessons learned. People use language and sometimes mean different things. I say a lot when I'm talking about education is a human enterprise. Well, partnership is a it's a human enterprise, and that dynamic of purposefully engaging in activities that you assert will provide access or opportunity for all, which I think is the goal of equity, at least functionally. That it's a value proposition, and it is exercised in a human way, not a mechanistic way. I mean, you can probably articulate work lines, and you can map things out, but how a group, just for the sake of a mental picture here, You have a group of people, all of whom are deserving, but somehow you're creating some method of engagement, some method of advancement, and they're not all going to move in unison every step of the way. How do you or we today as an organization, an intermediary organization, how do we assert that, explain that? How do we say to reach equitable outcomes for all will require differentiated strategies so that people are tended or engaged authentically and then move towards this common goal?
As you describe that, it makes me think about the seal of Excelencia. I think for those who might not be familiar with it, we like to, really delve into what are some actionable strategies that people can do to be able to lead from this equity lens and be able to lead beyond crisis. And based on the work that you and Deborah have done over the past 20 years, I think an excellent strategy that has come about from your work is the seal of Excelencia. Could you introduce that you all created and really talk about how it benefits so many different people and institutions and how it's connected to excellency in education?
Happy to, happy to. Um, so, Excelencia's mission is accelerating Latino student success in higher education. And when we started in 2004, we created a project that was intended to elevate student success, Latino student success, in the context of discussions about institutional practices and policies. We constructed it with paired institutions, community college and baccalaureate granting, in three states: New York, Texas, and California. And we uh, overtly chose pairings of Hispanic serving institutions. Why? Because HSIs are often the institutions that when you engage in a national discussion about Latinos, you go straight there. So even though there are over 4,000 institutions in the country, you go straight to what was then around 400 institutions. It's now 600 institutions. And for people who use the moniker but maybe don't know what it is, HSIs are institutions that enroll 25% full-time equivalent. So that means it's full-time, but it's also formulas that have some part-time students. They enroll 25% Latinos enrollment, and they also have low expenditures. And were Deborah here, she would be adding more particulars because she is the national expert on HSIs. But the point is, the discussion about HSIs. Just go to our website. You will find data about HSIs for the last 25 years, and it emanates from Deborah Santiago. But the point is that we engaged institutional professionals, and we asked about Latino student success, and we quickly got into conversations that were maybe they were surprising, which was that, wait a second, we don't have to do that. Title V of the Department of Education doesn't require that we look at the retention rate of Latinos, or it doesn't look at time to degree. It doesn't look at, and we were going, no, 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 no. We are a nonprofit organization with a mission of accelerating Latino student success in higher education. We are not from the federal government, though we know and worked with the federal government. This is your opportunity, all of you. And the fact that you also receive funding means that perhaps you have some ability advantage, but whether it's tuition or whether it's a big donor or whether it's a federal grant, the question on the table is look at what you do and look at the trajectory for Latino students. That's where, in many ways, the seal began, because what we saw was the need to assert the premise that institutions would look at their impact on Latino students and then quickly quickly, once we started working with them, this wasn't just a generalized conversation. Let's look at your data. So enrollment, retention, time to degree, financial aid, I mean, the seal now is 8 measures of data. It also is, well, what do you do? So the doing part was what we call evidence-based practices. We don't use the term best practices, not because we don't like best practices, but to be able to say that, you have to have control groups. You have to be able to uh, implement assessments in a way that most of us don't have the means to do. And so we want to be transparent. So it's evidence based. It will. What is the size of the program? How many students are served? What is the budget? And it's all transparent. So we're not, we're not sneaking it in. We're just saying it's evidence based rather than best. And then the third category is leadership. And the leadership is where the rubber meets the road, because it's really today it's intentionality. What is the strategic plan? What are the hiring practices? How is the institution engaged in public discussions about their role and many other dimensions? For the first 10 years, what I've just described in an early stage form was a simple tool and an opportunity for some presidents and chancellors to who wanted to engage in this. We could pull this out and talk with them. 10 years in of our work, though, we kept saying, this is going very slowly. And there's got to be a way so that when people have institutional leaders have an interest, dare I say, an ambition to do this, that we can work with them in an articulated way. So 10 years in, we created Presidents for Latino Student Success. And we created it, as we do almost everything, by inventing on a public stage. We looked at the institutions we worked with, and I picked 10 presidents and chancellors, and I invited them. Would you like to be a president for Latino Student Success? And they said, well, what is that? And I said, we're going to figure it out together. And what it is at the very beginning was an agreement that they would focus on Latino student success, that they would identify at least one other person. So presidents and chancellors work on these things, but they implement with a team. They implement with, so let's not make it casual. Let you decide who on your team, who in your cabinet, who would be working with you. And then let's be public. Let's create a web page where you literally will be a president for Latino Student Success. Your picture would be up. It would cause people to say, well, what is that? And then you would say, well, Excelencia invited me to do that. And I think a purposeful discussion about change is what we engage in. And it grew from the original 10 in 2014, where we were celebrating our 10th anniversary, to over 200 today. Now, that network is responsible for enrolling a third of the Latinos who are in baccalaureate programs in the country. So it's fascinating for us to see, out of 4,000 plus institutions, the institutions led by people who want to do this work are showing up. And as great as that is, and it's clearly a runway that is going to keep going, we're impatient. And so even with the growth of the network and Deborah's ability to think about how do we use data in an institutional setting to affect change, she took what was the original acceleration plan, which was the tool from the original project, and it kept iterating and iterating and iterating. And then we finally, because we had done a national effort called Ensuring America's Future by increasing Latino college completion, that's very policy oriented, and we talked nationally about the growth of the Latino community, we said, I think we're ready. And in 2018, we held a briefing in conjunction with our annual fall convening where we literally announced the seal of Excelencia framework, articulated what it would take, and said, we now are going to invite colleges and universities to participate. And the first cohort was in 2019. And I'll stop at some point because I love talking about work, but, but then the pandemic hit in 2020, and we were fully prepared to say everybody's going to grind to a halt, and we didn't. Institutions didn't. And there was a cohort in 2020 and a cohort in 2021, 2022, 2023. And because this is not a prize you hang on the wall, although there's a plaque that commemorates the achievement, it's a 3-year certification. And the fact that the entire strategy, the certification system, is voluntary. We don't give people a prize, and we're not in a position to penalize anybody. It is the willingness of institutional leaders that share our focus on the capacity of colleges and universities to intentionally serve Latino students and thereby learn how to serve all. Because there's not a single institution that we work with that only works with Latino students. There's not a single leader that discovers something that's impactful with low-income, first-generation Latino college goers that doesn't immediately say, let's figure out how to do this. And the final thing that is happening before our very eyes, what is it they say? Imitation is the highest form of flattery. Well, we've got folks who are saying, well, let's create a seal of fill in the blank. The Department of Education, Secretary Cardona, advancing something called Raise the Bar. They reordered the words. It wasn't data practice leadership, it was some order, but they will say it's the same premise. Secretary Cardona has spoken every year at the seal announcement. And then more recently, one of our SEAL certified presidents has decided to borrow from some of these strategies and talk with members of the state legislature in California. And there are elements there of a SEAL for Black student success. And we feel complimented that people are seeing the framework as a means to look at the impact and then to hold yourself accountable for the success of all your students.
That's amazing. And Sarita, I think when we look back on this episode, as we sort of respond to it and as our listeners get into this, like the inspiration from this and the ability to take what you all have done and use it as a way in which for others to be inspired to do their own work is so critical. And it's just so, I appreciate your passion so much in this. So I want to thank you for being a part of today's episode. That's going to wrap us up for today's episode of After Further Consideration. You heard from Sarita. Go check out edexcelencia.org for more information about this important and powerful organization. And we hope that this conversation sparks you to be inspired to go through the hard, heavy lifting to make your dreams and make the thing that you're most passionate about come true. And thank you, Sarita, for all the valuable insights on your work in advancing diversity, equity, inclusion throughout the work of Excelencia in education and onward.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for this opportunity. And for everyone who is listening, please know this work is primed to grow. In the face of what we are dealing with right now, your attention and commitment is vital. Together, we will make it a better place.
That wraps up today's episode of After Further Consideration. We hope our conversation has sparked new ideas and provided valuable insights for your own work in advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion on your campus and beyond.
Thank you for listening in. Remember, fostering meaningful change is a journey. Be encouraged and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible in creating a more inclusive educational environment. After Further Consideration is a part of the Enrollify Podcast Network. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too.
Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional.
Our shows feature a selection of the industry's best as your host. Learn from Brian Piper, Allison Tercio, Eddie Francis, and so many other of your favorite leaders in higher ed.
Enrollify is presented by Element 451, the next generation AI student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful and personalized interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.